Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include Marian apparitions, shamanic theme park designers, and more Rococo no-nos as we talk fake rocks on Created Things. Hello and welcome to Created Things, the only arts podcast hosted by two guys who rock, but not in anything resembling a cool way. I am artist and psychotherapist Jacob Flores Popchak. With me, my good and excellent friend, Dominican priest, and I think you want to be called burgeoning medievalist now.
I am
Father
burgeoning.
Gabriel Toretta.
Yeah,
You are burgeoning. How you doing, Father Gabriel?
Well, I spent all day burgeoning actually, which is incredible. It's kind of exhausting sometimes, and occasionally you molt. Because you have to unburgeon from what you were before. So there it is.
So this is sort of a hermit crab-ish process.
I was thinking more like
you're getting
serpent, but yes.
A serpentine kind of you're just getting larger and larger medievalist skins.
Yeah, I think so. I felt like this happened one time. I was this guy whose poetry I spent 6 months reading. Which is in Latin, of course. He talks about snakes a lot more than you would expect. And there was...
Is this Theodulf?
This is my boy Theodulf. Yeah, Theodulf.
Yeah, we've talked about him on the podcast before.
And he has a poem where he, like, in a single couplet, he uses like 8 different words for different kinds of snakes. And I have now memorized all of them, so I now know a lot of 9th century Latin words for snakes. So there it is. Yeah, that's life. Yeah. So So these are the things. Adapts, by the way, is the kind of snake that when it bites you, it makes you thirsty.
And what kind?
It makes you thirsty.
No, I'm saying what kind of snake?
It's the kind of snake that when it bites you, it makes you thirsty. God.
I'm asking you to repeat the name because I didn't understand what you said.
I think it's daps.
Daps? Okay. I wasn't sure if you said asp or not.
No, you might think so,
asp,
but no. And probably has no etymological connection with the word asp.
No, probably not. I've never heard of this kind of snake.
Well, it's a snake. It's a kind of snake that may or may not actually exist. This is the fun part about reading descriptions of aminals from times past, is you're never entirely sure whether this is a real animal that the person has seen, or whether it's a part of a received heritage of this is what animals are like, that he has received, that may not have ever actually mapped onto a real creature. So when you see a list of like 8 different snakes, one after the other, pretty hard to say whether or not all of them are real.
Yeah, there's a good chance that at least some percentage there is fake.
Yeah.
You're leaving out this other percent. You said there's some of the time where they've actually seen it, some of it's a real animal they've actually seen, some of the time where it's a fake animal they've inherited belief in. You're leaving out those awesome times where it's a fake animal they've actually seen.
Well, yeah, also true. That
happens every once in a while. Those are my favorite ones, personally.
Yeah, there's I was really surprised in The Life of Saint Anthony by Saint Athanasius, which is written in like the 350s, and it's like one of the most important texts in Christian history, and it's just this really incredibly beautiful life of the first sort of prominent desert monk. And so he's out in the desert and he's doing stuff that you do in the desert, when you're not doing peyote in the desert. Let me clarify. He's doing other things you do in the desert, like randomly
like doing ayahuasca.
Like doing ayahuasca, obviously. Yes, exactly. And so at one point, he's in the desert and an Ono centaur shows up.
What's that again?
Yeah, you might well ask. So you know how like your normal centaur, like your unprefixed centaur, you're just your basic your basic white girl centaur, is like horse bottom, man top, right?
Yeah, sort of the abdomen of a man sticking out where the horse's neck would begin.
Yeah. The Ono centaur is man top, donkey bottom.
Oh, so like just a centaur, but instead of a horse, a donkey.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. You think
how could you tell?
It seems like it takes a lot of knowledge for like looking at a donkey. I mean, again, like if you live around these creatures all the time, like maybe it's easy to tell. I mean, donkeys look pretty different from horses, but if you can't see their heads,
the main way I tell the difference between a horse and a donkey is like by its head.
Yeah, by its head. But well, see, this is. I mean, that's why Ono centaurs are so tricky, you know, because they run around and they're trying to get like centaur discounts on things, but people be like, "Haha, actually, you're an Ono centaur." He's like, "Oh no,
actually a donkey."
See what I did there?
So one of these came to St. Anthony in the desert.
Yeah. Well, he sees one, and of course they're demons.
When he wasn't on peyote.
He wasn't on peyote. Well, of course they're demons, you know. So he sees one, and it sees him, and it freaks out, and it like runs, and it dies somehow, like it runs off a cliff or something. I forget. Anyway,
just runs into a wall.
He basically runs into a wall.
Just runs into a wall.
And he's like, "Oh no." Yeah. So.
Oh no, centaur, in fact.
Precisely.
Yes.
This turns out to be because in the Greek translation of the book of Isaiah, an animal that the English translation of the Hebrew of the Greek of the English translation of the Hebrew of Isaiah says is a jackal. I don't speak Hebrew. Okay. I have no idea. In Greek, this word was translated in the like 2nd century before Christ as Onocentaurus or Onocentaur. So there are Onocentaurs in the Bible.
Seems like a pretty liberal translation if the same word can mean jackal or half man, half donkey, or 1/3 man, 2/3 donkey, I guess is the case would be.
Have you ever seen a jackal? I mean, jackals
I have.
No, you haven't.
Looks nothing
no,
like
you
that.
haven't. Have you ever seen a jackal that looks like a half man, half donkey? Because that's the kind of jackal we're talking about.
Oh, okay. That rare breed of Ono jackal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As in, oh no, it's a jackal.
Yeah, it's the one that Yoko's descended from, I think.
Oh man, now I want like fan art of Yoko Ono as a donkey centaur.
Yeah.
I'm sure that exists.
I'm sure
already.
it exists. Don't ask the internet.
Some deviant art somewhere. Some deviant art somewhere has that. There's a subreddit. So we're going to move from that super, super niche and nerdy topic into somehow an even nerdier one. I have for a very long time wanted to talk about on this podcast one of my favorite subjects. And it's partially one of my favorite subjects because I know it's no one else's. But that is the subject of fake rocks. I'm kind of obsessed with fake rocks. And I'm not going to bury the lead
or
here.
You mean like...
No, I mean fabricated stones. I really am a huge fan of fake rocks. I get I know that this is incredibly nerdy, but I mean, picture it like you're at a theme park or you're at a zoo or, you know, any place that wants to make you feel like it's a different place. And if it's a good one of those, they're going to be potentially a few, perhaps a lot of fake rocks. And I really love fake rocks because number one, if a place has splurged on fake rocks, it means they're probably a cool place. And so I have an emotional connection where I'm like, oh yeah, they've paid big money for fake rocks. So therefore this whole experience is probably going to be rad. But I also just artistically, as I've grown up, come to really love fake rocks because, and I was talking to our producer Kyle about this because, even though he historically used to claim to like hate theme parks and stuff, he would always get very, very, very excited too when we encountered fake rocks. One time we went to the Cincinnati Museum Center together, and there's this Ice Age section with this very ornate cave that they've built.
Oh yeah, it's awesome.
And it feels like you're in a real. Oh, so
I've been there. It's amazing. Yeah.
And he got so psyched. He was like, "Oh my God, look at this cave!" And this is the kind of shit that I'm talking about, like. You don't expect to experience nature in a place, and then there is this incredibly ancient looking thing, this rock, this cave, this mountain. And oftentimes it's a rock that looks like another thing. So, you know, you might have a mountain that looks like the face of a bear, or you might have, you know, a canyon that looks like a car. You know, but ostensibly formed geologically over, thousands and thousands of years, except it wasn't. It was made by a person. And as I've gotten older, I've really come to nerd out about how how many different artistic disciplines have to go into this. And, you need painters and you need sculptors and you need people who actually study geology and, metal workers and all these things to make a product that on an unconscious level contributes to immersion for somebody experiencing a broader piece of art, that zoo exhibit, that theme park, whatever, that museum exhibit, whatever. But they're not consciously probably picking up on the rock at all. So it's playing a huge role in their experience. It's made by master craftsmen, plural, of like a ton of different disciplines, and nobody notices it. And that is my favorite kind of art thing. The art thing that takes that much work and attracts that little notice, but contributes that much to the experience of the broader piece. So that's just so nerdy that I knew we had to do an episode on it. And I appreciate you humoring me.
That this is basically the thesis statement of one kind of young earth creationism, right?
What?
Yeah.
I know so little. I know that so little that I don't even know what you're talking about.
So the phrase young earth creationism refers to Christian groups or people who profess Christianity who, because I say it's not
I like that caveat.
Well, because it's not like a defined group. It's not like, oh, I'm Presbyterian,
right,
therefore, that's sort of a cheap trick that like people will play, but it's not true. It's just people who are Christians and from their Christian belief and from a certain reading of the Bible, believe that evolution can't be real, and specifically like evolution is kind of a false flag. They specifically believe that like the Bible tells them that the earth can only be, and then this depends a little bit on how you read and do Bible math, but say 6,500 years old, something like that. That's it. Like that the whole universe, the earth, everything, but specifically the earth is 6,500 years old. Okay. So the funny thing, so that's what you call, broadly speaking, young earth creationism, but there are because the earth is young, right? It's very young. The earth is the earth is not even a bratty teenager. The earth is like sort of like still sort
of baby planet,
baby planet, like screaming, its eyes aren't able to focus yet. Which could explain some things. Anyway, yeah, like sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold. It's incredible, So, but there are, so there are various people who hold this view about the Earth. That God created it 6,500 years ago. Okay, and then there's also, like I'm from Eastern Washington State, and so like there's just, it was all dug up by these beautiful glaciers and stuff. And so when you're driving around in the deserty parts of Washington, and you just see all these geological layers, and it's like this whole beautiful, like you're driving, and it's like this, I have these really powerful memories as a kid of like driving an hour and a half, 2 hours away from my hometown, and you're immersed in this incredibly stunning like geological wonder of all these layers of the rocks, and they're towering over you, and you're driving around them and through them and stuff. So you think, like, well, what about all this, right? So one kind of young earth creationist way of thinking about about geological phenomena is that God is to the human race with the earth what a theme park designer is to a Disneyland goer with like the rocks in Indiana Jones or whatever. Which is to say that literally all rocks are fake rocks because God made them 6,500 years ago exactly the way they are right now, including, and I mean this literally, fake geological layers so as to test people's faith.
What the hell?
Yeah, no, there are real people who really hold to this view.
Wouldn't that make God like
bad? Yeah, it would.
A liar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bad, absolutely bad. A liar. He makes one of the premises here is that you can't trust reason. That like your own judgment, like the judgment of your senses,
or
reason.
God, apparently
you can't trust. Well, the only thing you can trust is the Bible. So it becomes a little bit confusing because you can't trust the way that. So kind of Orthodox mainstream Christianity has a real big emphasis on what you call like the book of creation. This is not a 1980s term. That's a really old term about like looking at the world around you and thinking about it and like learning how the world speaks to you of God as its creator and all that kind of stuff. So young Earth creationism, strictly speaking, rejects the notion of a book of nature, book of creation that could tell you about God, because all of creation is literally fake rocks.
It's all fabricated.
It's all fabricated there to try to trick you. It's immersive. It's engrossing, and it can trick you if you're not ready into thinking that things aren't the way they are. But in fact, you're really just on like an 80-year ride through Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And at the end of it, they will either be the eternal Temple of Doom or they'll be, I don't really know, the Crystal Skull. No, that's also in hell. Gosh. The Ark of the Covenant,
presumably.
We're going to stick with the Ark of the Covenant.
Or the Holy Grail.
Or
right?
the Holy Grail.
Thank
you. That's, yeah.
Right, there we go.
Yeah. So there it is. So I propose to you. So you offer me fake rocks. I raise the ante and say, what if everything you've ever known is fake rocks?
What if all rocks are fake? That is such a classic you double down. Like, what if all rocks are fake?
You just got to double down,
bro.
You
know the great irony of that, though? So I've wanted to do an episode on the Ark Encounter for a very long time, which for those uninitiated is this truly insane, they say it's a theme park. It's not really a theme park. But basically these Australian young Earth creationists built a gigantic ark using government money in the mountains of Kentucky. And it's also sort of like a personal temple to their own weird dinosaur fan theories. And I've wanted to do an episode on this for a long time, but basically Father Gabriel and I haven't wanted to spend the $75 a ticket to go. I had gone at one point though with my wife when they had like a discount. And not enough of one. We went and I will say, ironically, that place has no fake rocks. And it was actually my main criticism of it because the arc itself is very cool. And I don't want to spoil like what episode we would do on this, but just to give a little taste, like the arc itself is a really amazing structure. But rather than build like a sort of pseudo Mount Ararat around it to justify its being perched there, they literally just have it up on cinder blocks.
Cinder blocks?
Like a hillbilly car.
Well,
like
if you look it up,
like it's straight up like they have pillars that it's sort of balanced on, but the pillars are built out of cinder blocks. And so they just look like giant cinder blocks that the ark is just propped up on like Redneck Noah. And that is, so ironic, very, very ironic that this religion or this pseudo religion would have such passionate feelings on rocks. And yet my main criticism of their theme park is that they would have none.
No fake rocks. Well, again, the Earth as fake rock theory is not held by all young Earth creationists. They come in many varieties, like every kind of any complicated concept comes in many varieties, and this is one of them. So they may not be fake rock people. They may have other ideas, but my favorites are, no joke, the fake rock. Earth as fake rock, fakey rock. We're going to start a new series starring somebody who hasn't been canceled, and it's going to be great. So yeah.
So is that your main contribution to our fake rocks episode? Because this is what we do on this podcast.
I have other contributions. Technically speaking, I have a list, and that wasn't on my list. I just was thinking about it.
Oh, wow. That was just a random fun fact?
Yeah, fun fact. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah. Fun fact.
So I wanted to do a little bit of research into how fake rocks were made for this episode, because I kind of knew the gist.
Well, God said.
But I didn't know it. Yeah, God said. I'm gonna fuck with these people. No, I didn't know any of the lingo behind fake rock making. So I did a lot of research. One of the things I did is I went back and I rewatched something called The Imagineering Story on Disney Plus, which is not only the best thing on Disney Plus by far and a half, it's also the only good thing on Disney Plus.
Oh, wait, man, see, I was gonna say, are we getting paid $3,000 every time you say Disney Plus? But then you bashed it, and that takes away $6,000. How dare you?
They're not listening. They don't care. They don't care.
Disney, are you kidding
me?
me? Their drones are listening to everything you've ever thought.
Like so they're like, I think at this point he's like executive creative director of Walt Disney Imagineering, but he's this crazy shamanistic Frenchman called Jacques Orme. And he has, all of the necklaces and the ponytail and the giant hat and the crazy curly mustache and everything. I mean, he's, very, very, very shamanic looking kind of feller and wild. And he has designed most of the modern rock work for the Disney parks. So is just, freaking brilliant when it comes to geological study, and will go off for months at a time to a certain area that Disney is trying to model an attraction off of. And he will take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of up close reference photos to then go back to the team and spread out. And I was spread out the rock work for a place and tell a story with the rock work. And I think that's such an interesting idea, that you can tell not just the present story that you're experiencing, but the story of an entire, the history of a fictional place with rock work. So like a perfect example is he built Cars Land in Disney's California Adventure, which is widely celebrated as like this very inexplicable success of Disney, because even people who hate the movie Cars, just this land is incredible. And they built over 300,000 feet of hand sculpted, hand painted plaster rock work.
Okay, that is pretty
modeled
insane.
It after Bryce Canyon, modeled after the Grand Canyon, studied how sandstone erodes versus how other types of stone erode versus, in different geological periods, and built a broader history of, if you've seen the movie Cars, it's sort of this fictional Route 66 town, ostensibly, between Arizona and California somewhere. And they wanted to tell the story of the history of that place. And so you see areas where water would have receded, and you see how these mountainscapes that look a lot like the doohickey, what are those called? The ornaments on the front of a Cadillac.
Oh yeah.
They, the mountainscape looks like the ornaments on the front of a Cadillac, but they actually figured out how that could have geologically evolved over time with different water erosion and stuff, and built that. And it's insane to me hearing him talk about the process, because he was trained as a traditional sculptor, like a classical sculptor.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then he comes in and basically what you do is, and this is just a very, very simple version of a very complex process. But as I understand it from watching several interviews with him and some other rock designers, is you create a series of armatures, metal armatures that are collectively called lath.
Okay.
And this will essentially represent the three-dimensional silhouette of whatever rock work you're building. And that will, it looks kind of like if you were to render out like something in 3D and all those little green points, sure, that kind of thing, right? Looks like a jungle gym almost. And then they mix cement and sand and water into a mixture they called gunite. And they spray it through a power hose, like a fire hose, essentially.
Yes.
All over the metal armatures, all over the lath. And then they have to carve it before it dries.
Oh my gosh.
And so all these people come in with these minuscule little tools, and they are hand carving every crack and every water run and every erosion point and every time that there was a landslide, and they're planning this all out far in advance and doing a ton of work so that while it's still wet, they can go in and be carving these details out. And then once it dries, they're going back in with a completely different set of tools and recarving certain other areas because they want it to look like it would after it was damaged by different weather effects, which you can only do once it's wet, once it's dry. And then you send the painters in, who are all masters of like trompe-l'oeil and different environmental effects. Trompe-l'oeil being kind of like a fake scene that you can walk into and things. And they will hand paint, like with individual little brushes and sponges and things, every facet of the rock work. And most people aren't even allowed to get up close, at least in Cars Land, to any of these rocks. I mean, most of these rocks are over 1,000 feet away, meant to give you kind of this immersive canyon sort of that you're operating inside of. So nobody's inspecting this stuff up close. And this is, I think, the thing that I love most about fake rocks and anything like them, which is, I think it just shows a tremendous amount of respect for an audience. We live in a culture, I think, where by and large art is now, I think, and this is maybe the most cynical opinion I've ever shared on this podcast, but I think we live in an age where by and large art is designed for the lowest common denominator. You know, movies are made and they'll put, you know, there's like the classic joke of CinemaSins where, you know, the helicopter will fly in your establishing shot and will say, you know, New York City, USA, you know, that little caption will come up and they'll be like, as opposed to the New York and Moscow, right? But they have to put it there,
right? Because
they just assume the audience is completely imbecilic,
right?
And the same thing with, you know, paintings and illustrations. I mean, I've always gotten revisions back, like, do you think that's too complicated for kids to understand in this children's book? And, you know, by and large, you know, because of SEO and some of the things we've complained about on here before, art is largely made for the lowest common denominator. And so to have a group of people that's saying, hey, this rock that's 1,000 feet away from anything that anyone could touch should have 10,000 years of fabricated geological history attached to it, because someone might unconsciously intuit that, and it's going to give them a more well-rounded and therefore more edifying experience. I think that's just so respectful of audience and then so respectful of art that I think, as I'm talking it out, that's probably partially why I'm obsessed with this. And this Jalt Orme guy is really a poster child for that phenomenon.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I could see, I mean, because what it's making me think of is, you know, like cheap kids playlands and stuff like this that just basically have foam, you know, where they just simply do have foam or styrofoam that you just kind of cut into some vaguely rock-like shapes and you paint gray and it all looks kind of horrible, or like cheap, a certain kind of like cheap highbrow or like aspirationally middlebrow restaurant will have fake rocks as you're walking in as a sort of scene setting, and you can tell like that they're fake because they couldn't afford real rocks, because real rocks would be like, wow, you just spent, I don't really know how much a real rock of the size you need would cost. I don't know, $50,000 on a rock.
It's more transport costs because they're so freaking heavy.
It turns out it's literally a rock. And also you have to build your whole restaurant differently and foundations and stuff. Exactly. So my primary associations with fake rocks are sort of like, wow, that looks really bad. And it would be better if there was literally anything else here other than this, you know, or like, well, this is like fun for kids in the same way. And I mean, literally in the same way that like a cheap costume bought at a party store for like the Fantastic Four hero, The Thing, is like fun insofar as it's fun.
Very, very specific reference. Feel like there's a memory attached to that.
Well, just because he's fake rocks, right? Because like The Thing is made of fake rocks. Okay. That's what he is.
I'm too obtuse. I'm too obtuse for that.
Yeah. Focus, bruh. We're talking fake rocks. People who are fake rocks thinking. Fake rocks are people too, or at least one is.
At least The Thing is a people.
At least The Thing is a people. yeah, so you just think like, well, they're cheap and they're kind of trashy and they're supposed to look like the way, and that's totally fine. But no, that's an interesting like thinking about it like from that different horizon about like as a level of like respect for the craft simply as a craft, and like attention to detail that like specifically not only does nobody notice but nobody is supposed to notice, you know. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff in you know, computer architecture, various like at all kinds of levels of the ways in which like complicated software systems run and stuff like this, is that you're like, you have all of these things that take an insane amount of like craftsmanship and talent, but like the whole point is that they're literally never supposed to be seen, and that if anybody like is aware of their existence is because they have failed, you know.
Right, yeah,
which is just a whole, yeah, it's a whole interesting thing, you know. And that's like, there is something of that with fake, with this emphasis on fake rocks, or the attention to fake rocks, is that like, you're supposed to know that they're there, but you are also only supposed to have them like kind of in your periphery all the time.
Right, yeah.
Like, yeah. But they have to be good enough. And I guess that's the difference between like my experience of them is like the challenge is for them to actually be good enough that even if they were not in your periphery, even if they were right up close, that they would still look good.
Yeah. And I think it's also a respect for the nature too, right? Because you're not just in the cases that I'm talking about, whether it's a theme park or a zoo, and there are interesting things about the zoo version of these that we haven't even touched on yet. But there's like a radical respect for I mean, one of the interviews I watched with Orme, I may have actually sent you this one, but he was asked a question where he was asked to compare two different Disney attractions. He was asked to compare the roller coaster, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in Disneyland with Cars Land across the way at California Adventure. And these are both ostensibly like desert rock formations. And he was really he was trying to be nice, but he was genuinely perturbed by the question, because they were asking like, oh, did building Big Thunder prepare you for building this other thing? He was like, they're completely different types of rocks. What are you talking about? They're completely, like he said, sandstone erodes in a completely different way than the rocks in Cars Land. And like, it was so funny. Like he was very annoyed and he was trying to be nice about it. But I kind of love that too, because you're caring with the audience, but you're also kind of caring about and you talked about Book of Creation, but like as a Catholic artist, when you are rendering out a fabricated version of something natural, you are in some way imitating God, right? Whether that's painting the human form, or like, you know, in our episode on the spirituality of Vincent van Gogh, you know, when he was talking about operating in sort of the imagination of God when he's painting the flower that God hand sculpted, right? So as a Catholic artist, I particularly, I think, draw inspiration from anyone who respects a rock enough to say, no, I'm going to study this rock as closely as possible to fabricate it. And I respect my audience enough to fabricate it, even though they're never going to see it. And, you know, I'm going to put the budget up there to hire 10 of the best in their respective classes, because there's an interdisciplinary thing here too, with, you know, sculpting and painting and metal armature and concrete work, right, and digital fabrication and all these kinds of things, digital modeling and all these kinds of things. So yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of respect going on that I think I vibe with.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. Like I mean, you're right. Like I mean, even just from a artistic coherence kind of thing. I mean, it is cool. Like I like that idea of having all these different craftsmen from different fields and stuff who have to work together to create something, and who have to work in this like coordinated way, which is exciting. I mean, like that's sort of how you get great public things done. I mean, like an individual can make something great that is usually for private use, for private viewing, you know. So an individual work of art, or you know, a painting, or music, I guess I'd have to say would be different. But for like architecture
to perform the music, generally speaking,
that's true.
Like a lot of different.
Yeah, actually, no, you're right. Yeah, even for the performance, yeah, that's right. No, it's even music, it would still apply. But architecture, public sculpture, like this, when they're at the best, they surpass the capacities of the individual person, and they require this like cool artistic dependence upon one another. Like they make you depend upon one another, which is really great. Which is, when they're functioning the way they're supposed to, they're sort of participating in what art is supposed to do, which is like build up the common good, like build up the way in which we experience our dependence upon one another, and like open that to new horizons and enliven that. Again, this is all when things are going the way they're supposed to do. I mean, so that's just kind of cool. A cool factor about that, that is very clearly at play with the sort of fake rock thing, that like all of these people come together and they do this like cooperative work that produces something that is received cooperatively as well. It's received in this kind of communal environment, which is kind of a cool thing.
I want more of your thoughts on just fake rocks in general and some of the other things that you've maybe put together as you've made a study of this. But you mentioning kind of coming together and collectivist art and depending on each other and all those things bring to mind kind of the charisms behind our sponsor, Catholic Creatives and Catholic.store. So I'll give a little shout out to them now. Catholic Creatives, for its part, is an organization dedicated to igniting what they call a new renaissance of faith through prayer and beauty in the creative spirit. To do this, they connect, support, and promote artists and innovators and makers and storytellers from across the faith tradition. But as Father Gabriel is saying, it takes a community to bring big ideas to life. So by supporting our Patreon, you not only help this podcast, but you contribute directly to future workshops and artist summits and resources meant to support Catholic artists around the country, while also getting an inside track on these activities with access to our member-only Facebook group. So to join, we encourage you to go to catholiccreatives.org/support. And if you want to go the extra mile to support Catholic makers and artisans all over the planet, we also further encourage you to visit catholic.store. Don't give your money to big tech conglomerates or factories overseas. Support your local Catholic artist and business today by shopping at catholic.store. So what else have you picked up, Father Gabriel, in this study of fake rocks beyond, young earth creationism and bad Halloween costumes?
Well, I'm not entirely done with young earth creationism, recognizing that this was not part of my preparation. But because I have to say that there is also a book about this by there's this really amazing British fantasy author who's famous for the Discworld novels that he made, called Terry Pratchett.
Oh, yeah. I love Terry Pratchett.
He's the bomb diggityist, and I read him obsessively as a child, which is probably
that tracks.
No surprise to anybody who's ever read any of his works. So he's most famous for the Discworld series, of course, but he also wrote Good Omens, which is now a TV show, so now people know what it is. And also one of his early non-Discworld books was a book called Strata, which is literally like the plot of it is that there is a company that is like the young earth creationist god that just like goes and produces a planet with like fake geological layers and stuff. That's
in Hitchhiker's Guide too, right? They have like a company that builds the planet.
It's been so long since I read it, I can't recall. There may well be, but anyway, so just to say, like, guys, if you're into fake rocks, like read Strata, 'cause it's hilarious and it's also like 200 pages long. And there it is. But yeah. So I was thinking, like, other than like cheap restaurants trying to be fancy and like costumes of the thing, have I had any interaction with fake rocks from which to reflect? And I realized that actually I had one bit that was very powerful, which is that okay, so like scene, I'd moved to New York City, and was like, frankly,
New York City, 1982.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Cocaine is on every street corner.
Sorry, hold on. Helicopter. New York City, USA, 2005. Cut.
De Blasio is mayor. Pesto sauce is in every restaurant.
Exactly.
Times are
no,
good.
who was mayor? I can't remember. Anyway, it was somebody.
If it was 2005, it would have been Giuliani still.
I forget, maybe. Anyway, so I was new to the city.
America's mayor.
I was very like, whatever. It was a lot to take, and I was not ready for it, and it took me a while to get used to it. And now I love it, but that took me a while. And there's like really profound spiritual home for me became like the church that was connected with the campus ministry. There was this church called Notre Dame. And like, you know, at this point I had been Catholic for maybe like 4 years or something like that, 4 or 5 years. And I just didn't have a lot of connection with like history of devotion, saints. I knew absolutely nothing about the saints of any kind whatsoever. You know, like all I knew about Notre Dame is that it was a university, whatever. So just to say, like, that's kind of where I was coming from. But it was this really beautiful, 19th century French style church built by like immigrants at the time, and like beautiful marble work and stunning everywhere. And like they had this like a marvelous high altar with this like beautiful golden crucifix with actual Tiffany glass in like the halo and stuff that had lights behind them, because like that's when the church was built. And so they just like got Tiffany glass because that's just what you could afford, like they were poor, they couldn't afford anything else, so they got Tiffany glass, and it's incredibly beautiful. But then like it's designed, it's a certain style of church where you can there's an apse, so a rounded part of the church behind the high altar that you enter into.
That's the snake that when it bites you makes you thirsty, right?
Exactly. That's a daps, please. It's got a D, bro. Focus.
Call back.
So you walk behind it, and that was the chapel where they would have daily. So it's a chapel, and that was the chapel where they would have daily mass. And you look up, and the entire, so it's a rounded space, and the entire thing is also rounded in the vertical direction as well. And it is a cave wall of stone. And up on the right, if you're facing it, like up on the right, there is like way high up a statue of Mary, and then in the cave wall, and then over kind of on the left, there's a statue. I forget if she's part of the cave wall, or I think she's outside of it, of a girl. And this was all I knew. I didn't know what was going on here. Mary had something in her halo, words in her halo, but I couldn't read French at the time and didn't know what they were, and fine. But so I didn't know anything about it. All I knew is that like there was this space, and that was when I started to go to daily mass, and I would often go there for daily mass. And like I was like really falling in love with the mass, and like eventually kind of started to pray the rosary, this Marian prayer, and then we would do these like nights of prayer with the campus ministry where it would be like dark. It'd be we'd like pray. It would just be cool. I mean, you get like pray and do music and stuff from like 10 p.m. to midnight, and just be like, it's just this very kind of like early church sort of feeling, where like it's New York City, so you hear people kind of like reveling outside, and that's cool. It's part of the life. It's it is what it is. And then here you are in the dark, this rock all around you and these statues, and you're just like praying and singing with your friends to like just to praise God. It just became a very I have very powerful experiences of the heart with that, both of like friendship and of friendship with the Lord, and like being changed in my life with it. And it was a long time into like kind of living in this space and praying in this space and kind of being taught in a very real way, being taught who God is in this space and by this space, that I learned that this is that there was this Saint Bernadette Soubirous who in 1858, who was a French girl, or she lived in what's now France. It was France then too, but it was, she was very country, didn't actually speak French in our sense. Anyway, so in 1858, she's this like kind of illiterate country girl, who's like playing with some friends, like out by some rocks. And the Blessed Virgin Mary appears to her, and tells her, in her dialect, I am the Immaculate Conception. And this keeps happening, and it keeps happening, and it keeps happening. And she ends up, as part of her sign of that this is real, is that like she tells her to like dig into the ground where there's nothing. There's just desert ground, you know. And she digs into the ground with her hands, which, you know, you can't. This doesn't work. Digs in the ground with her hands, and like a spring begins to come up, and the spring becomes literally a fountain of living water, and it becomes a source of miracles. And of course, like there are things about it that like don't make sense. I mean, you literally can't dig with your hands to find a wellspring. Like that doesn't. Those things are 20 feet, 50 feet under the earth, you know. So like there's some kind of something here that's really astonishing. I mean, so it's received as a miracle because it's not physically possible, right? And so so that too is a sign of that this is real, and there's a lot that's important with that anyway. But this is what we call the apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary at Lourdes, and it is one of the most important ways that the Virgin Mary has sort of been present to people in the modern era. She appears at other times in other ways, but this is probably, I dare to say, like the most important one. And there's just a lot of devotion here to the Virgin Mary from this. Bernadette Soubirous becomes a really great saint. And people make pilgrimages to Lourdes all the time because the springs are literally miraculous, you know. I mean, it's not magic. Like it's not like you touch the water and everybody's automatically healed, but there's a lot of miracles from it to the present day. And there's just a lot of devotion to it. So, many places actually around the world, you will find these fake rock grottos, they're called, because it's the Lourdes grotto where this is because there was this kind of, it's just a rocky cave where the Virgin Mary appeared to this illiterate peasant girl. And there's something wild about this, that this is the only Marian apparition I know about. It's one of the only maybe it's the only kind of Catholic devotion that I can think about where people are not satisfied with the story, and they're not satisfied even with statues, that they have to create an immersive environment that is like being in Lourdes in whatever way they can. And to do that, you need to create a space full of fake rocks.
Yeah. So the parish, and I'm outing myself as just like a hardcore religious zealot when I say this, but so my first date with my wife, my first real date with her, we went to mass first the morning up before we went to the museum, and we went to this parish, St. Stanislaus, which is the sort of Polish Slovak parish in Pittsburgh. It's this really, really gorgeous church. And they have a side altar with this exact same thing. Rocks aren't very well made, but they are still, big concrete fake rocks, statue of, Our Lady of Lourdes, statue of Bernadette. What actually makes this one particularly special, though, is this is the side altar where JP2 prayed when he visited Pittsburgh.
Oh, cool.
And so they actually have his little kneeler there, and you can it's like a little wooden kneeler. It's a crappy, wooden kneeler, but he kneeled on it, and you can kneel on it and pray there too. And they just have it sort of attached with a bike chain to the floor so that nobody can steal this relic. And you can go pray in front of these fake rocks where he prayed. And it's a pretty cool thing. And that's where we had our first date. So similar kind of intense, my wife and I, similar intense emotional connection to this particular fake rock tradition. But I like that you say it's wild, right? You say it's wild because there is a disruptive capacity to nature, even fake nature, that is really sacred and important, right? This is why we bring, I think, Christmas trees inside, right? This is actually kind of the point of a tree inside, is that this isn't just unexpected, like it is, but we can't stop there. I think there is something inherently disruptive about nature. Think grass sprouting up through the asphalt, right? That we build these, we fabricate society and civilization, and nature comes along to sort of show us how fragile and ephemeral and temporal we really are. And so we put this evergreen tree in the center of a space that would otherwise be very sterile and corporate and cold, and it becomes a transcendent space, or at least shocks us into something closer, neighboring transcendence. And in the same way, bringing your wife flowers that are sitting on the counter, or a painting of nature, are all varying degrees of disruptive in a similar sense. But when you go into a church, or when you go into a museum, or when you go into any of these places which have about them a certain kind of pomp and circumstance, and I don't know exactly what kind of pomp and circumstance it is that I'm trying to put my finger on here, but I think there is a certain kind of like, like that I can't put my finger on when it comes to like a church or a museum or a theme park, not in the sense that it's dignified, but in the sense that you paid a lot of money to be there, and there's like an expectation put on you and things like this. And you go into this space that requires something of you that isn't ordinary. And yet even this non-ordinary thing is disrupted by nature, in this case by rocks, and they're very ancient seeming, and they're very jagged and craggy, and even though a part of you knows that they're fake, and I think that's an important thing here, right? Nobody's lying, nobody's saying, oh, this is a real cave and we built the church or the museum or the theme park around it, right? It's fake, and yet the disruption still acts like that slap across the face that snaps you out of your banality for a second. And I think can, in theory, and maybe this is too optimistic of me to say artistically, but I think can, in theory, open you up to something more profound.
Well, it's interesting. This particular church that I was talking about actually had kind of the contrary effect, which is because I would say it was not apparent to me as somebody who didn't know anything about the story and had no idea why anybody would ever like build a gigantic, I mean, it's big, like you got to understand this is big, like you can fit like, I mean, not huge, but you can fit like 50 people in this little site, in this little,
that's pretty big,
chapel. I mean, it's not like a little like one kneeler situation. It's big, it's a whole wall of a church. And like I really thought it was real for a while, until one time I was helping them set up for Christmas, and we walked around behind it, and then I saw that it was concrete. But part of this was because where I was living in New York City, which was just a couple blocks away from this church, there is a gigantic real rock called Rat Rock. Like it, you can Google it. I haven't done so
Rat Rock
since Wikipedia was quite what it is now, but I'm pretty sure it has its own Wikipedia page. Because guess what? It's a rock the size of like a 1 or 2 story brownstone right next to a bunch of like 3 or 4 story brownstones that somehow still exists, and it is full of rats. And so, Rat Rock is not like it's not an affectionate pet name. No, it's full of rats. I one time kicked one with my bare foot. It was gross. I didn't intend to. Gentle reader, blot that out from your memory. But I can tell you,
it feels like the kind of thing that would be on a pirate map.
Yeah,
like
Rat
take
Rock.
10 paces past rat rock. Why is it called rat rock? Because it's filled with rats.
Well, I was looking for something more poetic, but I guess it's just full of rats. Okay, yeah, there it is. Yeah, no, it's gross. Yeah, it's gross. A lot of rats at Rat Rock. So I just thought like, oh yeah, they got. I remember telling somebody once like, yeah, they must have like built this church around it. It was so cool. And there is like, okay, you can say like, well, he's just special, but like, but there is something about that, because there is a weird thing about what we're talking about with fake rocks, because specifically they're fake, where like they aren't nature, they aren't real, they don't have any like non-man-made aspect to them that could achieve that sort of disruptive element that you're talking about. And if you think about other things that could be, for instance, like in a church or or you might also find them in like a hotel lobby or whatever, or a cheap restaurant, that could be fake. Like, for instance, fake flowers. When you see a fake flower, even if it's a pretty well done one, you pretty much always, or I should say, when I see a fake flower, I pretty much always feel like ripped off. You know, like,
yeah, no, I agree.
Didn't care enough. Like, because one can get those, you know, like, unless somebody was in the direst of poverty and this was like literally the only thing that was available, no one would really be moved by receiving a bouquet of fake flowers, right?
Sure. Because of their ubiquity, because they're
availability.
Attainable.
Because if I actually wanted, because it's a real ersatz, you know, it's a real, like, it's a cheap replacement, where like the real thing is actually available, but you just didn't care enough to get it or to pay the cost to get it, you know? So like we have fake lilies because Easter comes every year and lilies are expensive and we just buy them once, you know? But I do think that there is something different about like fake rocks in a space like that, because they are a thing that it's not possible actually to have naturally disrupt your space. And the way, if I could put it this way, to show that you care enough to make the sacrifice that the thing is worth is to make them be fake. So the way that you have them be real is by having them be fake.
Yes. And I think there's a part of it that's really, really well said. And I think there's a part of this too that you're pointing out, which again goes back to the number of craftsmen it takes. Because like, why ultimately do I want to put up fake flowers instead of real flowers? Are real flowers much more expensive than fake flowers? Well, not at first. Right? I mean, I can buy a bouquet of roses for about the same price as I can buy a bouquet of fake roses, give or take, depending on, you know, where you are. But what is expensive is some kind of landscaping or horticulture team to keep up live flowers.
Right.
Or even in a church space. I mean, you've been a pastor, right? I mean, you need people there to change out the fresh flowers and water them and maintain them, even if they're, you know, just in little pots.
Right.
And so fake flowers feel like a ripoff because it's a one and done thing. They're produced mostly by a machine, you know, in some sweatshop somewhere, and then they're kind of thrown out.
The machine is sweating? That's terrible.
It's awful.
Are we not paying the machine a living wage?
We almost never. Robot slaves. But you know, but the real flower is considered more worthwhile because of the number of people that it takes to maintain it, in no small part.
Yeah.
Right. And then, you know, in the same way, well, not in the same way, in the exact reverse way, I could pay a guy to heft a huge boulder on the back of a truck and drop it in the middle of my space. I could do that. I haven't run the numbers. I'm not sure how similar that cost would be to paying an artist to build a bunch of fake rocks. But it's probably somewhat similar, depending on how heavy your real rock is. But then once it's dropped there, I'm not going to do anything with it ever again. It's just a rock. It's just going to sit there. But if it's a fake rock, I've got to hire people not only to construct it and design it and imagine it and fabricate it in the first place, but I've got to hire people in most cases to upkeep it because these things don't look
the care
very
and
good.
feeding of fake rocks.
Right. The care and feeding of a fake rock. I mean, to go back to our Disney example, I mean, the sun in the places where Disney parks are is so drastically oppressive that when I was working a film, a short film I was doing in film school, and we were, as part of the short film, we were in one of the Disney parks at like 4 a.m. when it was closed to the public. And they were like, I think every day or every other day, they were going through and repainting all of the benches.
Oh, wow.
Like
yeah.
Every other day they go through because
bright. Yeah.
Perfect. Everything has to be perfect, and the sun will destroy it. So you think about a fake rock, which is meant to look like it's not like a bench, not like a fabricated thing, meant to look like it's been there for millennia. There are people out there upkeeping those fake rocks as part of the regular like budget of the park,
so that your rock doesn't become weathered. Right. In the wrong way. It doesn't become actually weathered and only becomes fake weathered.
Yes.
Which is...
Oh, this is like actually one of the great ironies of just theme parks in general. Like I've heard interviews with Imagineers talk about the Haunted Mansion and how they will have to go in and put up cobwebs again and like put in dust in the right places because like the ventilation system will blow away their fake dust and fake cobwebs.
Oh my
gosh. They have to unclean it. They have to ruin it in the right way, like strategically once a month.
Oh my gosh.
And I love that. I love the process of ruining things the right way. But yeah, so I think that's a very long way around too. I think that's part of what you're hitting on here is it takes the fake rock takes more work and is therefore, even if you don't totally process it, worth more or it's felt to be worth more.
Yeah. And well, that's interesting. It is
the reverse
also
of the way a plastic flower would be.
It is also just impossible. I mean, to be honest, it is impossible in most situations. Like, and so like, if you want that reality, then you have to fake it to have it be real. Which is just really wild. And I don't know. I mean, there's something very particular, I think, about the way in which here, like in this example, particularly with the Lord's apparition, like the faking it makes it real, you know, like that like there's something that the world over, that this is like the one devotion where people like love the Virgin Mary so much, and they love Bernard Subaru, and they're so grateful for like the graces of Lourdes. You can find like little things of Lourdes water like all over the Catholic world. You know, they're sold at little gift shops and stuff, and everybody has a friend who like has a bucket of Lourdes water hiding somewhere, you know, and if at a once you must be this Catholic to ride this ride situation. And like when you put all that together, it just leads to people like making a whole bunch of fake rocks so that they can pray in this really immersive way. Which is, again, there just isn't any other one that I know about, which is really wild.
Yeah, I will say, so in my research, and I'm surprised I didn't think of the Lourdes shrines, but in my research, so there is a tradition among Vietnamese Catholics, and I know you've been all over Asia. Have you spent any time in Vietnam?
No, I've never been to Southeast Asia.
Okay. But there is a tradition among Vietnamese Catholics where the nativity is placed inside man-made caves. And there's like a significant amount of competition to create the most realistic and ostentatious cave. And then these caves end up then being saved and in the church space or in the home space and used then as the tomb from which Christ emerges.
Oh my gosh,
Easter.
this is the coolest thing. Are you kidding me? Are you serious?
So Yeah, totally.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
So,
that's
isn't
so
that
cool.
really neat? So theologically, that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And then artistically, it's worth looking up because traditionally it was made with cloth, and very similar to the process that I was describing before, but just without the gunite, without the concrete mixture. So they're building their metal armature with chicken wire or whatever else, and then you're covering it up with cloth or sometimes paper mache. And you're building this really ostentatious cave that the Nativity takes place in, and then later the resurrection. And there are photos of Ho Chi Minh specifically where like every street corner has just a larger and larger and larger cave. Because this isn't really a culture with a Christmas tree tradition.
But
the Christmas cave thing is like,
all out. I did not know anything about that, and I love that so hard. It is out of control. Like, bring on building a cave that is so boss that I'm going to keep it, and then I'm going to use it as like a sepulcher. Like, P.S. a solid 4 months later.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it doesn't age great.
Oh my
gosh.
What
I kind of love.
I love this so much. Yeah. This is incredible.
You mentioned we talk about the person who volunteers to take care of the plants in the parish, and that woman in my parish growing up was from Vietnam, and she sort of approached the pastor and was like, I know that I'm the only Vietnamese person in this whole church, but like it would actually mean a lot to me if you would let me do this. And he was like, I'm giving you a huge budget to do this. Like, this is very important, and I want to make this happen for you. So literally even now, I mean, this is like 20 years ago that she probably approached the pastor, and they've changed out pastors twice, but it's just so important to the people now that everyone will donate their supermarket paper bags around Advent, and she will just start piecing together this big ass like 9-foot cave with all the crumpled up paper bags, and she'll spray paint it and everything else
so much.
And then it just sits there in the church, kind of this empty cave collecting dust for 4 months, and then gets decked out for Easter with all these sort of 2D cutouts of angels and things. And it's really camp and ugly and just so wonderful.
I love everything about that. I love absolutely everything about that. England used to have a tradition that didn't last from Christmas to Easter like that, but it was specifically for Good Friday, and then leading into Easter. That was somewhat similar. You'd make a tomb basically, and it was this like really like each parish would like make their own physical tomb. I'm afraid I don't know the physically what they would look like exactly, whether they were caves or whether they were what. But it was this like really central aspect of kind of everyday ordinary Christians' devotion, all the way up until they were made illegal in the Reformation. Like
all good things.
Like all good things. So yeah, no, that's so cool though. I have totally wanted to. I've tried to convince pastor friends to like bring them back because they're so cool. Yeah, that's really great. I want to offer like one other kind of thing. So we're thinking about like all this, we've been thinking about like the fake rock as like a literally built object, but there is one other kind of fake rock that I think is interesting to reflect on, which is the
dad rock, like the kind of music that dads listen to.
Rock. Oh my gosh,
it's not exactly real rock, is it?
Not exactly. Like ultimately, it's kind of like Led Zeppelin covers. It's not really much, you know. So like the painted rock, right? So there's
a painting of a rock,
like paintings in which rocks have an important role.
Sure.
Da Vinci has a couple of famous Madonnas, where there's these really called Madonna of the Rocks. There's two different versions of it, and they're like really wildly, like ominously over present, like crags everywhere, and just sort of like, what are you doing, bro? But like the specific example I wanted to talk about was so if there is one time period that I want to give everyone on the planet permission to hate, it is the 18th century. Okay,
you do hate it.
Let's have group hate. Hold on. Yes, feel the hate within you. I think doesn't like the Emperor say that in Star Wars? It doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure it was a good guy though.
Yeah. Feel the hate within you.
Feel the hatred within you building up towards the 18th century, because it was the worst of all centuries. And one of the things
talking about like Rococo.
I'm not everything.
Kind of
I mean, you know what? I'm gonna lay that blanket. Everything happened in the 18th century was awful, you know, and it's just how it is. And one of the ways that this manifests is 18th century English portrait painting. So there's this, one of the best museums in the whole world is the Frick Museum in New York City. It's absolutely incredible. It's just like, hey, I'm a railway baron and like I have insanely good taste and all the money on the planet. I'm just going to buy all the best things that are available in the world, and I'm going to put them in my mansion, which is relatively speaking for a museum small. It's just my mansion.
He had another mansion in Pittsburgh, which is also a museum.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I'm used to that one. Yeah.
And it's just the best. It's just one of the best museums I've ever seen in my life, because it's just the right size and it's everything in it is perfectly picked. It's just everything in it is priceless, you know, except there's one really embarrassing like room painted all over the walls with like pink cherubs and stuff. It's very regrettable. But all the paintings are absolutely perfect, except for there's a bunch of paintings by this 18th century English portrait painter named Thomas Gainsborough, whom I and all right thinking people recognize to be awful. So there's this painting though that's at the Frick. It's a portrait painting. It's called, because it's a portrait of Mrs. Peter William Baker.
Sexy name.
Sexy. And it's they're about life size, maybe over life size. I'm short, so it's a little bit hard to tell what's supposed to be life size and what's supposed to be like, oh yeah, no lady was ever that big, you know. But I don't know. It's either life size or extra life size. But like, again, imagine the scene. It's like, there's you're a late 18th century aristocratic lady, and you are dressed the part. So you are head to toe in what looks to the untrained eye like a combination Queen Amidala nightdress, prom gown, and like Jane Austen situation. Which is to say, you're dressed in a very elaborate dress that it's not entirely clear how one moves in, but it looks very nice. Your hair, because you are an aristocratic lady who is wearing a dress that's hard to move in, that is suggestively and vaguely undone around the breast in a possibly tantalizing, possibly negligent kind of way. Your hair, because you are an aristocratic lady and it's 1781, is sort of like up, you know, like everybody in the club, put your hair up, you know, put your hair up. So she put her hair up. And because it's Thomas Gainsborough, you look a little bit like you were bitten by a vampire a few weeks ago, and it has taken real hard effect because those ladies tend to be pretty washed out and not a natural color. Okay, fine, but that's how the lady is. So, but you're there and you're all dressed up.
What does it have to do with rocks?
And anything could happen. And the whole left side of the painting is a gigantic rock, and the concept is she's in the wilderness. Dressed like Queen Amidala. Like, okay, Thomas. Boy, I really like that dress. You did a great job. What's the I don't want to quibble, but why is half the painting a rock? He's like, I love rocks.
I mean, and who doesn't? I also love rocks. Half the painting
is a rock, and why is it's like there's dirt everywhere. There's like flowers growing all over the rock, and there's like wild trees in the background and things. You're just like, Thomas, honey, like, how did that woman get there? And what's she supposed to do with all those rocks and trees and stuff? So artistically speaking, I don't like it. But I do love this painting because of how wild it is. You know, you just look and be like, why are you doing this? But this was a big fashion, by the way, in 18th century portrait painting, especially English, is that you'll have like somebody who's in this like elaborate aristocratic costume, and then there'll be like wild nature all around them, you know? So it'll be like a big rock or like trees, wild forest, and then like storms in the background, you know? And like, okay, cool. Right. What the heck is this rock doing here? It's a kind of a neat counter proposal. So at one point you said like, well, one thing that's cool about rocks is this sort of sense of wildness, even though they're man-made, there's a sense of wildness. In Gainsborough's paintings, and I think in the paintings of the time, I propose that they actually serve kind of an opposite purpose. So like, if it were a contemporary painting, I mean, like all the styles and everything changed and stuff like that. And you'd say like this just think of the subject, person and rock. If it wasn't some kind of like ironic postmodern sort of joke about whatever, I would expect that what this painting would be trying to communicate would be a kind of Ferngully portrait mode. You know, so like this wealthy lady is like, she's wealthy, but she's not too wealthy to be close to nature. You know,
she's still connected with
she's
her
so wealthy
roots, man,
that she's so into the earth, and then she's going to pay somebody like $100,000 to paint this gigantic, possibly over life-size painting of her. So in touch with the earth, you know, and it's got to be wild because I want to be in touch with wild nature, not like tamed nature. That's if it were painted in 2022, but it's painted in 1781, and the like cultural notion of like wilderness and like wild nature as this like desideratum, this thing that like I want to like a value that I want to hold up above all other things, is not widely held. In fact, it's kind of more widely invented in the 19th and especially 20th century, especially in America.
Post kind of industrial revolution, as we're becoming more disconnected from nature. Yeah,
and it's a really specifically American thing. So like we've talked about him before. Roger Scruton has who's a philosopher, a British guy, has a really interesting, and it's a really good point that like British sensibility to the present day does not really, from his perspective, value wilderness. That's really Americans who are like all about wilderness, like nature as wilderness as the ideal kind of nature, particularly in this period, like 18th century. Like ideal nature is sort of like nature tamed by man. Nature tamed by man, you know, like
wildness submitted under my dominion.
Yeah. I mean, like Francis Bacon, who, you know, the philosopher and natural scientist and theologian Francis Bacon, not the crazy painter, is sort of famous for sort of coming up with some of the elementary principles of what we call like modern science, whatever, all these kinds of important things, scientific process. He was so into this way in which the human person could sort of like tame nature, and that like this great goal of the human being to tame nature, that he writes very kinds of wildly and disturbingly about the glory of science being that it takes nature, that it gives you not just raw wild nature, but as he says, quote, nature racked and tortured.
Ooh.
And that's great, he says. It gives you nature racked and tortured, which is to say that you, this is the language, the metaphor gets lost in contemporary moment because we just think like scenes of the Spanish Inquisition. But when you part of your normal juridical process is that you want to find out like, oh, what did this bad guy do this bad thing? I'd be like, I don't know. What? Ask him. I asked him. He said he didn't. Well, rack him and torture him until he tells you his secrets. And
right.
That's
this
what
is just a commonplace expectation.
To rack into torture is to make something give up its secrets. And so that's like Francis Bacon's idea, is that this method, this like process that he's developing will help people force nature to give up its secrets, which is by racking it, drawing it on the rack, and torturing it until it has forced all of its secrets out into man's control. And that's the kind of thing that is happening in this Gainsborough painting, is that the rock is there because its sort of attempt at wildness actually sets off and submits to the all-pressing, all-controlling culture of this woman, that her culture and her elegance and her persona is so immense that it racks and tortures even the wild rock to being a part of her train.
Yeah, well, and I mean, obviously, a modern sensibility doesn't vibe with the idea of racking and torturing something to give up its secrets, but I still think in certain cases.
What about the whole series 24? Isn't that the entire point of it?
It's 2022 now. We don't talk about 24 anymore. Yeah.
Sorry.
We remember it fondly and refuse to acknowledge why. That was a Bush administration thing. But I think whether or not we agree with that language, I think we can reverberate with, and this whole episode is really about this process of going to nature to sort of learn its secrets and recreate them, right? And whether that is doing what this painter is doing by rendering out this rock, which is, I will say, side note, no easy feat. I mean, a lot of people can paint a flower, but most people, when they go to paint a rock, are just going to paint like sort of a gray blob. And to do a good rock is actually quite a lot of artistic talent to do that. But that's a sidebar.
Yeah, he's actually good at it. I mean, he's a very talented artist.
Yeah. But there is this, whether it's that or whether it's, I'm going to go out to, the Badlands and take 100 photos of rocks up close and then bring it back to my team. We're going to fabricate it. There's a really cool element of going and seeking to learn nature's secrets and recreating that and seeing that as something sacred, whether that's from a Catholic perspective, because, there's a richness of God, the divine, the Virgin Mary appearing through the wildness, or whether this is this sort of 18th century, we have to prove our greatness by kind of dominating the wildness, or whether this is a more sort of modern Avatar-ish, we are subject to the wildness. There's an appreciation for, I'm going to go study and deconstruct what this wildness is and recreate it. And I think that's just a really, really cool thing. So with that in mind, as always, we thank you guys for listening. We encourage you to take what you've heard tonight and maybe go make your own fake rock, go render out some of nature's secrets for yourself, and go forth and create cool things. You've been listening to Created Things, a podcast of Catholic creatives, hosted by Father Gabriel Torretta OP and Jacob Flores Popchek, produced by Jessica Flores Popchek and Kyle Meineke. To find out more about how you can support the podcast and other ventures for artists, visit catholiccreatives.org/support.